morning. Welcome to this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by us, Enzo Abadi and Jose Antonio. And basically, we're going to talk about a book named Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Throughout the book, Stevenson provides historical context as well as his own moral and philosophical reflections on the American criminal justice and prison systems. He ultimately argues that society should choose empathy and mercy over condemnation and punishment.
Have you ever thought about how racism affects all of the black people's lives?
Just Mercy is a book that tells a story that is real, and all the things the book said all happened in the United States years ago.
The story revolves about the evolution of law and Jim Crow legacy throughout the civil rights movement, referring to a series of civil lawsuits, brutality, and litigation that took place during the civil rights movement.
This is a very nice book, but you are probably asking why you should read it and what information does the book provide us. We will try to convince you, the audience, responding to the three essential questions. Why should you read this book? How can you learn from this book? And why is it important now more than ever? These are the questions that we'll be answering to and possibly generate an interest in the audience.
So, Jose Antonio, how's your day going? Just want to ask you a simple question. Why do you like this book, Just Mercy?
Well, and I think racism is something that should have never existed. And this book is talking about how someone, like a person, in this case Brian, was never interested in the money or in what comes after doing the job, but instead of that, he just wanted to help people, especially those in need. In those times were the black people that were accused to death row, even if they didn't do anything. So that's why I like this book, because it talks about justice and how to be merciful to another human being. Now, having all that clear, we are now going to pass to the next stage, to the body paragraph and the topic sentences.
This book teaches us a very good lesson about racism and how before they just blamed and threw guilt to black men and women just because of their physical appearance.
Also, this book shows that there were still good people that tried to defend the black man and woman's rights and set them free.
Quoting, while intellectually stimulating decision theory, econometry, and similar courses left me behind a drift, but then suddenly everything came into focus.
Discovered that the law school offered an unusual 1-month intensive course on race and poverty litigation, taught by Betsy Bartholet, a law professor who had worked as an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Unlike most courses, this one took students off campus, requiring them to spend the month with an organization doing social justice work. I eagerly signed up. End quoting.
Here we can see that Brian is not interested in any of the intellectual courses, challenging courses, but he's more interested in justice and also helping black people sentenced to death row for something they didn't do.
They even told him that the salary was nothing of another world, but he didn't care, as his intentions were pure and he was just looking to help people. This book also teaches us something very important, that no one should be judged differently by their appearance, and that you can also defend black people, even to this day, that racism is not so raw as it was 40 or 50 years ago. Also, racism is something bad that has no sense and that unfortunately is still a thing in 2020.
Quote, finally, I've come to believe that the true measure of our commitment to justice, the character of our society, our commitment to the rule of law, fairness, and equality cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the powerful, the privileged, and the respect among us.
The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. End the quote.
This quote from Brian Stevenson is one of the most knowledgeable in our opinion. In this book, this isn't just a fact, it's reality because some people treat differently people not because of their skin color, but also because of their social status.
This book can be more important now than ever because recently there are a lot of cases of racism in the United States, and not just in there but also all around the world. There have been a lot of protests for justice to be made, and this book talks about racism and how it was wrong and how they framed and killed an innocent man.
Like nowadays, George Floyd, for example, being a case suffocated in front of a crowd, and at the end he didn't do anything. You seen this scar on the top of my head? This title, this his head to show me. I got a scar in Greene County, Alabama, trying to register and vote in 1964.
You see this scar on the side of my head? I got that scar in Mississippi demanding civil rights. These aren't my scars, cuts, and bruises. These are my medals of honor. End quoting.
So in this sport, we can appreciate that the thing that old man in the wheelchair, sorry, have to overcome due to racism.
Being black in that era was very difficult, and that man suffered once just to fight for his and other black people rights. And so, I would like to make you a question. What do you think about George Floyd incident a few months ago?
Well, this that's a quite heavy question, but I think the case of George Floyd was very unjustful, and being that George didn't do anything, and the police came and showed him in front of the crowd. That that released a protest, worldwide protest, um, of people fighting for them, for their rights.
Yes, and I would like to add that is something that even actually, well, in actuality, it's still happening, and I think justice should be made. But now, with that answer, we can pass on to the conclusion.
In conclusion, Just Mercy is a very relevant book in actuality, because although the events happened like in the book, like decades ago, the main problem is still happening in actuality, and it shows us that good people still exist.
Just Mercy gives us a clear example that black people are not guilty just because of their skin color, and that it's fine to fight for them and help them get their rights as human beings. Now, let me ask you this. Would you fight for black people like Brian Stevenson? Or would you just back out like the majority?
Well, after all this discussion about this wonderful book that I honestly suggest you to read, Just Mercy was given us by Miss Brenda, being our English teacher. In my opinion, it was very enjoyable, this lecture, and it made me understand in what world we're living. In such a bad world, where some people is scared to do something, especially because they're Afro-American. And us as a minority, we can relate, but the problem hasn't stopped, and it continues in actuality. And I think if you read this book, it can make you understand that world we are living.
So, from part of Ansel and me, we would like to thank you for listening to this podcast and have a great day.